All right, let's jump right in. The story of the crucifixion. It's one we all think we know, right? An event from history, something that happened 2,000 years ago. But today, we're going to look at it from a completely different angle, one that turns that ancient symbol into a powerful, practical tool for your life right now. And that's really the big question, isn't it? What if the real point of that whole story was never about something that happened back then? What if it's actually a blueprint for a mental process you're supposed to be using today? And the man who really championed this idea was the one and only Reverend Ike. His message was so explosive because it just flipped everything on its head. He'd say, the cross isn't a thing to be admired. It's an action to be taken. It's a tool for a total personal overhaul. So let's just put this side by side, because it's a huge shift in thinking. On the one hand, you have the traditional view. The cross is a symbol you worship. But then you have Ike's view. The cross is a tool you use. For him, it meant one thing and one thing only: crossing out. It's an act of mental execution against the part of you that's holding you back. And this quote just nails it. Ike would hear people sing that old hymn, "I will cling to the old rugged cross," and he'd stop them. He'd say, "Why in the world would you cling to it? The whole point is to exchange it for a crown." So he'd say, "Why wait? Let's make the exchange today." See, the cross isn't the destination. It's just the doorway you have to pass through to get to the crown, that symbol of your real, magnificent self. And this is where it all stops being about theology and becomes this kind of a radical psychology that he called the science of living. His whole idea was that this isn't about blind faith. It's about practical self-knowledge. His argument was brutally simple. You don't fail because life is hard. You fail because you have no idea who you truly are and the kind of power you're working with. So, to teach this science, Ike would take a really familiar idea and just turn it inside out. He'd quote that famous line from Scripture, "He died that we might live." And then he'd pause, and he'd ask the question that changes absolutely everything. Who exactly is the he that has to die? And his answer, well, it floored people. It was never Jesus. His answer was you. The he that must die, according to Ike, is your old, small, limiting idea of yourself. That version of you that's keeping you stuck. So what is this old man that needs to be crucified? Well, it's that voice in your head, isn't it? It's that story you have on repeat. It's any identity that's built on lack and limitation. Every single time that thought, "I'm poor," or "I'm unlucky," or "I always mess things up," runs through your mind, you're giving life to the very thing Ike said you've got to execute. He called this whole process the Great Exchange. And here is the absolute key to it all. It's not about addition, it's about subtraction. You can't just slap a new, positive belief on top of an old, negative one. It doesn't work. First, you have to cross out. You have to crucify that old identity. And only then, in that empty space, can the new you be resurrected. And let's be crystal clear about this. Ike didn't see these as, just bad moods or fleeting thoughts. He saw them as entire mental programs running in the background of your mind. A poverty program, a sickness program, a failure program. And his logic was just so simple. You don't negotiate with a faulty program. You uninstall it. What's so fascinating is that Ike wasn't completely alone in this kind of thinking. His contemporary, the metaphysical teacher Neville Goddard, was teaching the exact same thing, just with different words. Where Ike said you have to crucify your self-identity, Neville said you have to die to your current state. I mean, it's different terminology, but the mechanism is identical. An inner death has to happen before you see any outer change. Now, for decades, these ideas were kind of dismissed as being a little out there. But as the legendary motivational speaker Les Brown, who was actually mentored by Ike, said it perfectly, he was ahead of his time. Because you see, eventually, science started to prove him right. I mean, just look at this stuff. When Ike was talking about how a sickness identity could actually affect your physical health, he was basically teaching the principles of psychoneuroimmunology before it even had a name. When he talked about a failure identity becoming a self-fulfilling loop, that's the core of psychocybernetics. He was working with modern identity theory long before the research papers ever caught up. And maybe the most stunning scientific validation of all came from this one landmark study. A study that ran for, get this, 26 years. So this study, it was led by Dr. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania. And after all that time, it came to a conclusion that sounded like it was ripped straight out of one of Reverend Ike's sermons. Seligman found that a person's core belief about themselves, their fundamental identity, was one of the strongest predictors of their success, their health, how long they lived, and their ability to bounce back from anything. Wow, science had finally provided the data for what Ike knew all along. Okay, so if he was so right and science was starting to back him up, why was he so controversial? Well, here's the thing. A lot of institutions were happy to preach the gospel about Jesus. Ike dared to preach the gospel that Jesus himself preached, a gospel of immediate internal power. The idea that the kingdom of heaven isn't someplace you go when you die. It's within you right now. It's not about waiting for someone to save you. It's about activating your own salvation. And that, right there, is why this message is so empowering, but also so confronting. Because if that power is truly inside of you, well, it takes away all the excuses. Which brings this whole thing right back to you. Let's just go with the premise for a second. Let's just say the cross isn't just a story, but it is a psychological tool you can actually pick up and use right now. If that's true, then the next question is unavoidable, and it's intensely personal. What version of you is still alive that really needs to die? What's that old story that you keep rehearsing over and over in your mind? What's the limiting identity that you're still clinging to, maybe without even realizing it? Because the final unavoidable takeaway here is this. Until that old self is crossed out, the crown, that magnificent, powerful, higher version of you, is always, always going to stay just out of reach.